Hello, welcome to the Elevate Your Wellbeing podcast with your host, Rachael Wagstaff. I am so excited to sit down with you today to have not just a little chat, but a little reflection. So, as I'm recording this episode, I'm actually having a little pause on my social media content. So I'm still a little bit present on social media. I'm still checking in, but I'm actually having a little step back. But I'm not going to dive into that today. I think that will be more relevant for next week's episode, because this week's episode is all about reflecting. And I'm going to dive into that today. So do make sure you've got a journal. That might be a notebook. You might prefer to use your phone notes or your computer. It really doesn't matter. But do make sure you've got some way to either take notes, or you will get a journal prompt at the end. If you are new to this episode, firstly, welcome and thank you for stopping by for a listen. But I always give you at least a prompt to reflect on, usually at the end of the podcast, but sometimes it's somewhere in between, depending on the topic in mind that I'm going to be diving into with you today. Also, make sure that you have some water as well. Always key to stay nice and hydrated. And then I always like to start off with just highlighting the lunar cycle, the lunar phase that we're in. So on Monday, this coming Monday, the 10th of July, we have a last quarter moon, which will be in the sign of Aries. Now, Aries is all about taking action. It's a beginning. And it's really interesting because this particular moon phase is highlighting where you were back when the new moon was in Aries in March 2021. So we are highlighting how far you've come, who you were between then and now. And this will really, really, really be a lot easier for you if you are a journaler. Don't worry if you're not. I've been on and off again with the journaling aspect. Luckily, I have journaled a little bit back then, so I have got some notes that I can reflect back on. And it is really interesting just to really reflect on that journey. And this is a part of my story I haven't actually shared a lot of. I've shared a teeny tiny little snippet of this. I believe it was in a reel on Instagram. And that was all I was ready really to share. So if you were to reflect back all the way back to March 2021, can you even remember who you were then? And this is it again, the key point of why journaling is so powerful, because a lot of times we don't know who we were. We're going through the motions and we don't necessarily know who we were. So if you don't journal, but you use a form of social media, that can really help as well, because you can use that as a reflection. Like, what were you posting? What were you sharing back then? So that can be really eye-opening as well, as a way of looking into where you were at that point. And for me, this was really about how I was surviving whilst shifting my business. How I was surviving whilst shifting my business. We were a year into what was supposed to be a 3-week hiatus, as it were, of not doing anything in person. And a year later, there was still all this madness, chaos, whatever you want to call it, going on. And I had kept coming across two people that have really influenced me since then, and still do in certain ways, that I have then worked with more as a coach or as a mentor. And I'm honestly really, really thankful that I had these people in my life that I could go to. And ironically, these were people that I was connected to only online. I've never met before. One of them I am actually really, really, really psyched about. I'm meeting them for the first time in person in August, which I'm really excited about. But I knew I was ready to shift my business. I was really in limbo. February 2020, I had just moved from what had been my yoga studio premises since June, well, pretty much April, but it wasn't official until June 2014. And then in 2020, I was moving to a slightly different location. When I look back, I really know it wasn't the best move to make. But But I knew I knew the location I originally opened wasn't going to be a long-term thing. I knew I wanted something, to sound really cliche, bigger and better. It didn't necessarily have to be in those exact words, but I knew I always called that studio my stepping stone. It was what was going to take me to a slightly different place. And I always just assumed that was potentially a bigger space. So I could really host the community more and welcome in more teachers, because that I felt was very restricting, in that it was only me and it was my space, and I was very limited on that. But that might be another story. If you're interested, do let me know. I know I've said I am on a social media break or a pause, but I am still present there if you are DMing me, or the details are in the show notes. So I had someone approach me to say, I really am interested in hiring a space I have to you. And it seemed like the best move to do. But actually looking back, it wasn't the right fit. You know, when it's like it looked, you've got two jigsaw puzzles and they look like they could fit together, but it was clunky. And I think it took that pause in March 2020 for me to then realize that I need to close my doors and start shifting elsewhere. That decision came about in August 2020. So from August 2020 to like March 2021, I was really in limbo. And that's quite a long time to be in limbo. And I think anyone who has had a baby or multiple babies and have gone through postpartum, you feel the same. You know, I don't have children, but I do listen to a lot of people who I really respect in the business world, talk about the shift they've had from just being a business owner to suddenly having a child, and just the difference that's made. And this was very how much I resonate with that, because it was the same. That, you know, our business was my baby. I really loved and nurtured and cared for what I was doing and how I was showing up and serving the community. And oh yeah, I really felt in limbo. And then things just started falling into place around, like, just as we were moving into spring 2021. So I know this was a pivotal point for me. So it was really interesting that one of the astrologers that I follow, and I have her astrology book, which highlights all the moon phases, was highlighting that this upcoming last quarter moon in Aries is an opportunity to reflect back to 2021. So when I look back at where I was in 2021, I was just signing up to OCA with Rachael Bell, and she was very much, this is for coaches, this is coaching for coaches, this is how to accelerate your business. And I, again, was really sitting on the fence, because I was like, well, I'm not a coach, I'm a yoga teacher. I don't know what, I didn't really know what coaching was back then even. You know, I was like, it was this whole new broad thing. And I was like, maybe I could do this for my other business. I've spoken about on here, and if you follow me on social media, the online automated business through the water that I do, you've got the well-being for the water, or you have the opportunity to have this additional business on top of that as well, which is affiliate marketing. And I thought maybe I could use it as a way to really dive deeper into that and really give a slightly different service to the people I had coming through for that business. And I was really mixed. I really, now looking back and reflecting, it's interesting looking at the notes I was taking as I joined, and I quite literally joined in March 21. I have the journal right next to me. And it wasn't even then, I didn't even realize that I was using it as a journal. I was using it to take notes as I was going through the course. But looking back, it really is a journal. It's like, these are the ideas I have, and this is what I'm moving through. And a lot of it is branding, and it really highlights the mindset I was in back then. And I can really, truly tell that I was still in that survival mode while I was trying to shift my business. And I think a lot of us are still hovering in survival mode. And this is something I want to dive into a little bit more in another episode, because I want to try and keep these short and sweet and focused. And another key thing that was happening at this time that really kept me in survival mode was, because of what was going on in the world, we were still very restricted with what we could do, with who we could see. And I had a relative, and I'm going to leave it at that because I don't have their permission to share specific. But I had a relative that needed to have radiotherapy. Potentially a cancer growth was coming back, and they wanted to quite literally attack it from an external point of view rather than go through surgery again. But because of where it was, the type of treatment it was, it meant this person couldn't drive. And obviously, with stuff going on, it made getting things like patient transport, using public transport, very, very limiting. And as you can imagine, going through treatment can be really draining. It's like you just want to be in and out as quickly as possible. So I really, really, really am thankful that I have my own business. I wasn't restricted or tied to a 9 to 5. So I could turn around to this person and say, when are your appointments? I will take you in. And I did that for 5 weeks, 5 whole weeks, 5 days out of the week. And this started around March, April 2021. So for 5 weeks, I was picking this person up. We were driving 20, 30 minutes to the hospital and then driving 20, 30 minutes home. And I actually think I was more knackered than they were because obviously I was driving, I was feeling a little bit stressed with everything going on. I couldn't go in with them. So I was then sat in the car. So there were times when I have actually shared on my social media. I would pop in my stories and share that I was sort of sat in the car and I'd be having my lunch. And I don't know whether I shared why I was doing it. So whether people were thinking, oh, well, you can't go out, but you're just needing to go out and have a different location. Maybe you're just sat in the car somewhere for lunch, so you're having a little bit of a break from the screen. But the reality was that I was sat in the car. The shortest was 10 minutes, to the point where I didn't even get a chance to have any lunch, in that moment, or the longest was about 2 hours. And it really varied. There was no specific, you will be in and out, and it's all done and dusted within an hour, basically, of travel time there and back, etc. So I would be sat in my car. Most of the time was up to 2 hours on every day. And then I would be coming home and still teaching in the evening. I was trying to run my online classes as much as possible then. And even in that time, things have shifted. But I was like, right, I'm going to really utilize this time. So I was going to line up podcasts to listen to and trainings to watch and go back through. Luckily, when I was having my actual live group coaching calls, when I was in OCA, they didn't clash with appointments, which I was really grateful for, because I could really, really be uber present. But there were trainings within that needed to be dove into, and I really wanted to make the most of it. So most of the stuff that was written in this journal, it was actually written whilst I was sitting in the car waiting for this relative to finish their treatment. And it really helped me get through. But as you can imagine, things, if you've ever done a course before, a lot of things get dripped. So we don't want to overwhelm you when we're doing courses. And I say we, because I run my own as well. It can be really tempting when you're uber eager and like you just want to take all the information in. Actually, you end up burning out, which, again, in my field as a wellbeing coach, is something I want to encourage you to take things slow and gently go through them. So as much as I was appreciative that it was dripped fed, so I couldn't like consume the whole course too soon, there would be a time where I was like, okay, or I'm now on day 3 of 5 and I've already gone through this week's content. What do I do now? And I might have listened to podcasts that have been released, or they're not being released till later in the week. So I also had a mentor within my affiliate marketing program, or affiliate marketing business, sorry. And he was at the time going live every single week, and he could go for like at least an hour, sometimes 2, and then he'd be getting guests on as well. So I would be like stockpiling all these trainings and literally sitting in the car and watching these trainings. And I think this really kept me focused. And I have shared, if you're within that business or you're interested in that business, I have shared podcast episodes that he's doing. He's finally started his own. I say finally because so many of us have been nagging him, like you and nudging him, like you really need to start a podcast because you have so much information and value to share. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, I highly recommend checking out the Diamond Life Mentor, which is Balaj. And yeah, going through the trainings that he was doing, and these were completely free as long as you were part of the business. It's phenomenal that kept me going. And then obviously having joined Rachel Bell's OCA, she's sadly not doing that anymore. And she is shifting into other stuff. Again, very, very focused with business people. But it was the showing up for myself and giving me that focus that helped me to get through almost a bit of a dark night of the soul, because I didn't know what I wanted to do in my business. I didn't know where I was going. And I think it's really powerful to acknowledge that stage in my life. So I really wanted to highlight that for this week's episode. Do go back and reflect on who you were. And when I first started doing reflection work was July 2020. This was the first time I had done a 90-day review and then did a 90-day plan, which is why every 90 days I highlight this on the podcast. And this is what really, really helped me to realize the power of that reflection. And I didn't have a journal to look through. So all I had, which I, again, I'm very thankful I did it, was I went through my phone and was like, okay, let's go all the way back to April 2020 and see what have I done? Because again, 3 months into a lockdown, it's like, have I actually achieved anything? And because I am someone who's very visual, I would take photos. And I had all these photos that I could go through, and I actually listed out every single thing that I had done within those 90 days. And it was eye-opening because until you reflect, you don't appreciate what you've done. You don't appreciate who you were. You don't appreciate the journey you've been on to get to where you are now. And this can really help you go from unstuck, from feeling stuck and unmotivated to feeling unstuck. So you have that drive, that motivation to go forward. So this is why I recently did my, as I'm going live or as I'm recording this, my most recent masterclass was called Refocus. And it was about finding these different tools so we can get that focus back because we've just gone through mid-year. That is still available. I will put the link in the show notes if you would like to either purchase previous masterclasses or if you want to sign up to the upcoming one. I do one every single month and they're 90 minutes. And again, we dive into slightly different things. So far we've had the rebalance, finding work-life balance, and refocus, that shifting our focus if we need to on what we're doing in life, whether that's around your goals or just how you want to feel motivated, quite literally focused on what you're doing and what you're creating. And then the upcoming one, as I'm recording this, is called Recharge. So it's all about how you can go into self-care practices to honor slowing down. And there'll be different things for everybody in here because everybody's life is slightly different and you have all different needs and demands. But yeah, it's actually really interesting. When you first say the date, I know for me, I'm like, oh, March 2021. And I had to really think. But when I found the notebook I had for who I was back then, it's really beautiful to see the shift. I had so much worry because I honestly didn't know where I was going with what I was creating and how I was wanting to show up in the world to serve people to feel better. And I had to really move through that. And I'm also very, very grateful for the people that help support me. And they don't even know they did it. So yeah, for my coach, Balaj W. Cardos, and to Rachel Bell, yeah, if it wasn't for their mentorship, their coaching, that's what really helped get me through. And this is why I keep coming back to coaching, because it is that powerful. So I'm going to wrap up this episode here. And if this is something that you would like me to dive into a bit more, please do let me know. You've got all the details in the show notes with how you can get in touch with me. I know I've highlighted I'm taking a little bit of a pause on social media. I still will be checking in with it. I'm just not uber present there at this moment. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit more on the next podcast episode. But if you would like to know a little bit more about this story, or if you would like some support with how you can move through this and reflect back to who you were back in March 2021 and how you can utilize that moving forward, then get in touch with a free discovery call. These are just 15 minutes, and we can dive into how we can work together and how coaching could help you. You could use the link in the show notes to book that. Like I said at the beginning, if you have grabbed your journal, have a little reflect back now to your journey from March 2021 to now. Where have you come? What have you done? What have you changed? What have you learnt? So you might take a little bit of time to pause and reflect on that. You might come back to this, and you might be going through journals. You might be going through posts from then. You might find photos from then just to help jog your memory. And I will look forward to seeing you next week.